and also time-lapse, only because I have to try and squeeze so many hours of video footage down into a viewable format for you. I think there's about 6, possibly 7 hours of video here that I'm trying to condense down. So anyway, just starting off here, obviously you're going to get the $10 tier reward, you're going to get the downloadable tutorial, but I will do a list of materials as well in the description. Possibly I'll need to update the description later when I get back to the other studio. I just need to try and get this edited and up for you. So here you can see materials I'm using to start with. I'm using, the paper is ArtSpectrum Colourfix Smooth in black, which is the first time I used it actually. I normally do my white on blacks on something called Somerset Velvet. So this is going to be the first video of 2 for the polar bear, but there will be more in the actual downloadable tutorial. It's going to be sort of part 1 polar bear, part 2 is going to be working on, and 3 and 4 is going to be working on other surfaces. So I will demonstrate working on the Somerset Velvet, also the black Daniel Smith watercolour grounds I've just been trying on canvas. Might do something on the scratchboard as well. It's just to show different ways of working with black supports. The pastel matte does come in anthracite, but that to me is just a dark grey. It is not actually black. So here, yeah, the Colourfix Smooth. I sort of had a love-hate relationship with this from the start. You can see here, literally I've gone in, what I've done is I haven't created a line drawing as such. I've used my embossing tool to mark out key areas of the actual image. So I've laid the image over the top and I've impressed using the embossing tool down through the image. So I've marked out the eye, the outlines, and some of the fur direction. So anyway, going back to this, I started off using the Caran D'Ache Pablos pencils. I only sort of narrowed it down to about 4. I've got the ash grey, black, white, and a light grey. As I went on using the paper, I did switch and sort of brought in the Polychromos, and I found the Polychromos worked so much better with it, but the 2 combined really worked well. So I ended up here, I'm just sort of placing in a few of my key initial lines, starting with the eye. The eye, as you can see, hardly any lines there. It's almost like a hint of an eye, and that is all that you need. Working on black is very different to working full colour or working even graphite on white. It's all about the negative space, and it's a really, really good challenge to give yourself and a good project to do, is to work white on black or just limit your palette. I mean, here I'm using greys and blacks as well, so it's not true white on black, it is more monochrome shades of grey. When I do my white on blacks, I do, on the Somerset Velvet, I do just use usually a single white pencil. So here I'm just carefully marking out just key lines, just getting a feel for that paper as well, which again, if you go to work on this Colourfix Smooth and it's the first time that you're going to use it, get a feel for it. It's really, really alien to work on. It feels smooth. At Paris, Cecilia was telling me, Cecilia Kinsey was saying that the Colourfix Smooth was developed more for work with pan pastel, and I'm going to try it with pan pastel as well, just to see how well it goes on there, because in theory it should, now I've worked on it with pencil, it should work well, because you touch this surface with your fingers and it feels really smooth. You go in with a pencil and it's not gritty, grainy with any uniformity. It's basically got pits and grooves and bumps and bubbles and all different sizes, and your pencil catches on it and you'll see the pencil it crumbles off at the end. That's why here I started off trying my usual technique of literally just putting down basic lines. But I found out then that no, I actually need to build layers. So later on you will see me start to put down a literally quick foundation layer using the side of my pencil, just to get some pigment down on there. And then I'd say you could probably get, using the pressure, measure, pressure guide that I've done on the previous video of say 3 to 4 pressure, you can probably get 4 or 5 layers on here. And then obviously if you go in with the Polychromos super sharp, you can cut through any waxy layer that you've got underneath. The literally here, just seeing I've got the eye in place. I'm just following the little lines that I've put in with direction away from the eye using that embossing tool. I'll try and see if I can do some embossing onto a spare sheet of this Colourfix Smooth and get it reflecting in the light so you can see how I've embossed it. But if you wanted to use a transfer paper, I'd just be really careful. I might even use a graphite one and just get a hint of an image on there. Don't use the white. The white will be too harsh. You can see here as I go over certain areas, you'll see it more later on when I rub the side of the pencil over the whole area. You'll see the lines that I've embossed as my line drawing underneath. You'll see that later on. You should see a hint of them now. You can see those dark lines. That's where I embossed the image in. So here I'm referring, I've got my printout image, and I've also, as usual, I've got it on my tablet just down here to the left hand side as well. So here's where I'm already figuring out that, okay, I put in my first light layer, and you do, just go in light, mark in your lines, and then go back in and add more pressure, more pigment where you want it. So where you've got those intense bright highlights, go in and push a little harder and build up layers, exactly as you do with the other normal colour pencil work. You're just building up the layers. So you will get your line drawing with this and your reference photo. I did and ah with this one. You'll see in the reference photo, it has got a lovely soft background. I did debate, shall I put it in, shan't I? But I'll probably do another version of this one anyway. This is a polar bear in actual life. It's called Blizzard, and he is at the Point Defiance Zoo at Seattle, and I was very lucky to go and see him up close whilst I was over in the US last month teaching. So I've got some beautiful pictures of him underwater which I'm going to create as well, hopefully in a more painterly way on pastel mats using the watercolour pencils. So here, just going up over that top edge, I'm pushing in a little harder because if you look at the reference, you'll see that light, it's very backlit, but it's very bright around that top of his head, going up over his ear, across the back of his neck, down over his nose, and then almost backlit under his chin later on as well. Just speeding it up a little bit here, because obviously you can see me how I started to put the pencil down. I started with the ash grey, I've gone in with the white, and now I'm going in with the black just to literally pop back in any of the black areas that I've lost by putting pigment down. And here, again, I'm finding out that I can build the pigment and it smooths out, it almost burnishes out. And in a way, I tried to force this, my usual method of working onto this paper, and in the end I realised I can't do that, I need to work differently. So I kind of mixed and matched my usual way of working white on black with how I normally use dry colour pencils. So I just accepted I needed to start building the layers, going in with my lights, then going over with my darks, mid-tones, getting the pigment down and then cutting back through. So still just using the Caran D'Ache pencils here, the Pablos. I'm sure, that's the ash grey, I'm sure you can use Prismacolors if you've got them. I'm going to risk it and buy some Prismacolor Premieres. I know I hear and read so much bad things about them. I need to give them a go, and I just hope I get a genuine box, of authentic pencils to give them a fair try, because I see, obviously, there's lots of rip-off fake pencils out there as well. So still here, I'm using my printed reference photo, which is the same size as my drawing. I've done this, the actual image is about 12 by 16 inch. I did them on a slightly larger piece of the Colourfix, simply because I wanted a bit more negative space around him. The final piece of this was called Out of the Darkness, because I actually created it. I was. Some of you know that I suffer quite badly from depression every now and again. It's what actually made me find colour pencils in the first place, and they do help me through bad times. And I'd say that when I was creating this piece, I was probably in one of the worst places mentally that I've been in for several years, and this guy basically pulled me back. Just as all I had to focus on was this guy. I couldn't focus on anything else apart from keeping up appearances for the business sake, just trying to keep going. That's why this guy's called Out of the Darkness, because he pulled me back to the light. And plus I suppose it quite suits the fact that he's on black paper and he's done in shades of grey and white. So here you can see I've started to work out now. He's smoothing up over the top. Here you go, see it a bit more clearly now. You can see where the layers are starting to smooth out as I build them up over the top. So I'm going back in again, just repeating now what I did before, placing in those lashes where I've lost a little bit of the shadow. And then down to the left you can see where I've just put a rough coat, single layer of the ash grey and the white just across there as well. And you can just see that areas that are pure black, it's where I embossed the original line drawing in. So speeding up a little bit here. I try to slow it down to show you a little bit real time, and then I just speed up because it's the same method, and hopefully you can just still see quite clearly where I'm working and how. It's a shame because the video, because I'm working under such bright, I use great big daylight lamps, clamped to my drafting table as I work, so it is quite reflective. So in reality that paper is true black. Obviously it's showing on the screen as a little bit reflective, so it is showing as a lot lighter than it actually is. But hopefully you can still see the technique here. As you see, when I go over that with the lighter colour pencils, how much it's building and softening and smoothing out. It's strange, as I'm quite tentative when I start out with most pieces anyway, but you probably see my confidence will grow with this one. As I do, I'll cover smaller areas, and then as I get more confident later on, I start working over bigger areas and covering more areas with that initial layer of base pigment. And obviously as well, normally when I work on using the watercolour pencils with the wet dry technique, I don't go in so early on to create such detail, but with this it's really key important, I think, to get that eye, get a feel for how the paper works and the pencil's working on there, and just build those layers until I know that's definitely how this one's gonna work. So here, just marking in again that backlit outline. And you can see those crumbs that are just dropping down there. That's where that roughness, that weird bumpiness of the paper is just taking the edge off my pencils. So I'm just mixing through here. I'm just putting the white around the edge. I've gone in with the grey, and now I'm going over that with the glazing it with the ash grey. Now going over it as well with the white. It just gives variations in the tonal value of that fur. You don't want white all over. It's just building up, and here we got where the eyebrow, the inner eye socket, coming up over that brow. I just need to knock a bit of shadow in there. I'll take it all back later on. This will get worked more later on. It's just building and building. And we'll work our way out from that eye, down towards the nose and out towards the cheek, and then back over the neck. You can see there, just above my fingers to the top right, the indentation. That's showing quite clearly there. You can see the indentation marks. So there's not a huge amount. I've got the outline, and then you can see down below some of the indentations just showing, hinting at the fur direction. So again, I just use them not so much as an outline drawing, just as little guides to go, okay, that's which direction that fur should be going there. So you don't draw in, mark in every single piece of the reference photo. Okay, so we're going to, again, you can just see those indentation lines, little marks. I'm just going to bring down over the nose now, pressing quite hard over that nose because it is pure white where it's backlit there, so I do want it lovely and bright. Again, just laying down first initial layer now. You see the crumbs coming off that pencil nib. So you know that there is roughness in there, it's just not consistent, it's just in certain places that it's flaking off, and it is big chunks that is coming off. So it's nothing like any kind of paper I've used before, but I have come away really liking it, so I can't wait to try it out. I've got all of the colours in the range. So plenty in supply, so I'm going to try the wet and dry technique on there with the watercolour pencils and see how that works. Someone has said that it will take water, so we'll just see. So I'm kind of colour blocking here. I've sort of marked in the brightest white areas and I've gone into the shadow areas. Obviously the down over that nose, there's bumps as it comes down over where the furrows basically down over the bone structure of the nose itself. So I'm just getting in my shadows first, and then I go back in and get the texture of the fur. So exactly as we'd work normally, we get our pigment down and then we worry about the fur texture itself much later on. I think it's really good just to get a good tonal value all over your animal. Here I was just playing around with a knife in there just to see if it would lift off, but later on we will be using, it'll be in part 2 of the video, we'll be using, I've moved on now from using those metal blade knives to starting to use the ceramic blade that I was introduced to in the US by one of my lovely Canadian ladies, something called the Slice. Which it comes in different sizes. I'm going to do a little demo video. I've started a demo video, I just need to edit it and get it up for you as part of your hints and tips this month. And that'll be a little intro to using the Slice. It's probably my most favourite find in the whole of the US. I actually squeaked when I discovered it, when someone showed me it. First thing I ordered when I came home as well was the small version of it. So as you can see with this, you can't rush it. You need to feel your way through, building the layers. That's probably the third layer just going in over there now. Marking in the shadows, the contours. And as well here, I've got my glassine paper. You can't see it. My glassine paper is under my hand at all times because I don't, not knowing the surface as well, one, I don't want to smudge, but two, I don't want to be leaving any grease, oil from my hands on there because it will affect the pencil. I was going to say pencil going on later on, more likely the pencil not going on. So here you can see now that I've worked it out. I'm laying in, using the side of my nib, a little foundation of pigment, just to save me having to put it all down with strokes, individual strokes. I'm just laying in a layer, and then you can see the embossing marks coming through. And that's just using the finest of my little embossing tools. So obviously I've used the actual photo and laid the photo over the top, but you guys can do that. You've got your reference image, so you can print it to any size you like, so 8 by 12, 12 by 16, or you can take it bigger if you're really up for it. Or I'll be supplying obviously the line drawing as well. You can use the line drawing or the actual reference photo, and you can emboss through. Or like I say, if you're using a transfer paper, I would try the graphite on here. Now I've just zoomed in there so you can see the roughness. You can see now that layer of white that I've just put on there, the foundation, and how much those 5 or 6 layers even of pencil up over the top, how much that started to smooth out. So I'm doing it now with a layer of white, and I'm going in with the grey, which is sort of a mid shadow. the ash grey I'm using to almost sort of burnish over the top to where the fur's not quite white, it's more of a dirty, a lot of warm greys in this polar bear. Even though it's got that harsh white light over the around the edges, inside the actual fur is all very warm grey colours rather than a cold grey. So still working out from that eye, and down here we'll work out from the nose as well. So away in the fur direction, following the contours, following those initial lines that I marked down. Again, keep flicking your eyes back to that reference photo all the time. Now you see I've super sharpened up the pencil there. I just want to get a little bit of definition back in there. They've got these beautiful lines coming away from the eye where the fur splits, and you can see, I don't know how many people know, but polar bears do actually have black fur, so you see the darkness coming through. It's not just shadow, it's actually right down underneath his skin is black, so it's not like drawing a white dog who's got a pink skin underneath. This is completely different. Here, a really light layer, but I'm just feeling my way around and popping in those little contour lines. Some of it's textural, and some of it is just contrast. Shapes, seeing the shapes and lines and filling them in. Squinting at your reference photo, and back to your image to see if you've got the whitest areas bright enough and the darkest areas dark enough, and everything else in between. So just working my way down, away from the eye, away from the nose, down towards the cheek, just following the direction of the lines, following the direction of the fur. And now we're just going to come down, we're going to mark out the actual nose now. And again here, this is where your negative space becomes really important, because you're not drawing in a whole nose, but you need to give the impression of that being a whole nose. So you need to know, really look at where your lights are hitting, and the rest will be left into darkness. So you need to look at where your brightest point is. So I'm starting here with a mid-tone, and then I'm going in and brightening it up with the lighter grey and the white. So much of the nose and just down over the mouth is going to be left as pure paper. I suppose it's a bit like working white on white, those of you that leave blank paper. I never do, because I do my white animals usually on a different colour background, so I cover every area with some pigment. But I know a lot of people that do white on white leave a lot of paper, virgin, you know, no pigment on there at all. So this is very much the same. We're leaving a lot of the black areas with no pigment on. So going back to the reference photo itself, exactly the same as I said with before with your reference images. Pop it into a photo editor. With this working the white on black, put it into black and white, take away all the colour. Then up the contrast, up the lights, increase the shadows to really make the contrast pop, and that will really pull out the brightest areas for you and increase the shadows. It'll save you a little bit of work. So you need one image saved just like that you'll refer back to, but then obviously you need your true image as well, but again convert that to black and white as well. So here I've marked the brightest white areas down there, super sharp pencils, and then I've just gone back in there again with a super sharp with a black pencil, just to flick back in any of the lines that might have gone a little bit too thick. And just gradually work your way down that underneath that chin. Look how vibrant that is coming already. Just that hint of the nose, that hint of the outline of the chin. You don't even need anything else there. I have done one polar bear before on black where there was much less. It was really did depend on a lot more on that backlit image, and I want to do more in this style as well and do less fur work and rely more on the lighting and the outlines and the shapes. So there you can see I've laid down a decent layer of the, can you see there as well, just underneath that last layer of pigment that I've got, how much, even though I'm using the glassine paper, how much of that pigment is lifted down onto the next virgin layer of black surface. So it is quite chalky, and your hand is picking up those little flakes of pigment as it's coming off because of the graininess, grittiness of that paper. So again, exactly like I did down under that chin, we're doing the same up across the top, because over the top of his head, around the top of the ear, and then the top of the neck, that again is the brightest lit area. So I just want to get the ear marked in there first of all. Again, some of the lines will be there, but every time I pause, it means I'm looking back at the reference photo, just to make sure I'm going in the right direction and checking the distance and the angle and the level with the eye. Is everything okay? Look, yeah, see how much my hand is carrying some of that pigment up there. I'm pressing quite hard here. So you look at the pressurometer, as I'll call it. And we're doing a sort of a 6 or a 7 there, so quite a high pressure. Now you see, look, I've just brushed away that with my hand. Yeah, that pigment had come down. It just sits on the surface because it's quite smooth. So I was able just to brush it away. I suppose it's a little bit like a blackboard surface, but smoother. And here, just taking that white pencil, side of the nib, and before I work the area with any finer detail, I'm just making sure I'm getting that base layer of pigment down there. Pressing quite hard again now, just up over that top of his head. I'm kind of following the fur direction here, but I am really keeping my pencil on the paper as I move still here, because I'm just building it up. Because I know that's the ash grey pencil there I'm using now. As I come down, I'll obviously switch to using and putting in more contrast as we come down over that, away from the brightest area. Here I am lifting the pencil now, but again you can see I'm just literally pressing enough to make sure I'm getting pigment down onto that sheet, so that then I can go back in and texturise it with the sharper pencils. Obviously, if you're left-handed, it might be an idea to flip your image around so he's looking to the right. I hadn't really thought about that before. Or you might find it just as easy to work this way. Obviously, just if you hold your glassine paper and work away from the eye in the same directions. So here, yeah, I'm just building those layers until I'm getting rid of that, all that texture, and I'm making it nice and smooth. So then later on with the polychromos especially, oh, something's knocked my camera there. Obviously I had an intruder such as a little Sherlock coming to visit there then. One of the dogs, I'm sure. So here, exactly like I did on the over the nose, I've gone in with the white at the top, and then I used the ash grey, and then I've used the grey, and then little hints of the black as well. So coming down here, there's that dip under the eye socket, just above his cheek, so it's like the hollow of his cheek. I'm just marking that sort of contour in there now, using that grey. It's lovely to see this, actually, watching the video back, seeing it create in front of your eyes, I suppose. It's appearing. I find it fascinating, this whole videoing technique. Obviously it's not something I've always done. I've recorded snippets, but now I tend to film almost every piece from start to finish. It is, when I sit and do this editing now, it's just as fascinating for me to sit and watch as well. So I know a lot of you, especially with the donkey video, you've sort of sat and you can follow it and listen and rewind and get yours to the same point as it is in the video and then start again. So I'm glad they're being really of benefit to you guys. Obviously I'm hoping to improve with each one. With this one here, I was up and down like, oh, will it be a tutorial, will it not, will I finish the piece, won't I? And I sort of persevered through with the intention that yes, it will be. But like I say, I do want to do more with this white on black technique on different surfaces. So this is just going to be one part of that bigger picture. So if you look at your reference photo now, I'm using the grey first of all, just to mark in some of those fur lines. Because if you look at your reference photo, all around the top lip and going around sort of just by the jowl there, it's all left completely as virgin support, so it'll all be left black. So it's just a hint of the fur and the bristles around the top of his mouth that need to go in there. It's quite a strange thing to get your head around sometimes. It's like the importance of what you don't draw compared to what you do draw. What you leave out is equally as important, if not more so, using this technique than what you put in. Less is more, and it really does mean less is more in this this style. You see, the layers are still going on those areas that I've worked before. The layers are still going on, building up, softening the pigment that's there before. When you're working these fine, chunky, well, these bristles down here, just really keep an eye on that reference photo, because you don't want to put in too many. You need it to be quite true to the actual original image. pencil just went away there for a quick sharpen up. Still just using ash grey here at the moment. Because if you look at those, squint at your reference photo, and if you look at the fur down around here, and then look how bright the highlight is under that chin, it is softer, so it's not pure bright white. You could, if you wanted to, pop in 2 or 3 little bristles there just to really emphasise them, but at the moment just going in and placing them in with the ash grey. You see where I've zoomed in, even though all those layers are going down, how grainy it is still in some places. So now I'm going in with the white, just plucking a few little highlights there. I'm just using that white again, building the pigment. Trying to give myself a surface that's completely covered, completely smooth, that I can then texturise later on. Now you can see I've picked up the Polychromos now. And the Polychromos will give me a finer, harder point to go in and create these strong, fine lines that I want in there. It's something, whether it is the fact that the polys are just slightly harder, by starting out with those Pablos, the creaminess of the Pablos, the polys not only cut through and create texture, almost pushes the waxy Pablo pigment further down into the grooves as well. So the two work really well together, even though one's wax and one's oil. I often use them together on a lot of work. See, I get distracted as I'm looking at it. I'm then seeing that a couple of those highlights, are really standing out at me. I just want to pop them in, so I go back and I just pop them in. Okay, so I've picked up the Polychromos again now. I'm working down through that shadow area. Using one of the warm greys there. I'll double check and pop it in. It'll be in the materials list anyway. That area is starting to smooth out now. Still needs more pigment, but see how rough it is still down around the lower layer. Okay, so I had a tiny bit too much pigment down by that nose, so I'm just super sharpened up the black. I'm going back in and popping in some of the fur texture now, some of the darkest little pits and pools of shadow in amongst that fur, so it's almost like clumps. I'm only doing this where I've got to the point in an area where it's nice and thick and smooth with the layers of pigment. nice thing about this as well is you do not need the huge array of pencils for starters. It's lovely to be able to create a piece with just 2 or 3 pencils, or even when you just do true white on black and you just use the one pencil. It is lovely. It's quite liberating. And it's nice to slot these pieces in around your most colourful works as well, because then you truly appreciate it when you go back to working with colour. You sort of embrace the colours and are quite free with them. But with this, it takes away the worry of having to not concentrate, but not have to worry about sort of the colours really. You're just looking at tonal values, lights, shades, contrast, and then texture. So I think for a lot of you, this is a really good place to start. If you want to draw fur and you're new to colour pencils, just take one of the elements away. So take away the element of trying to see the colour by just eliminating the colour and just switch it all to black and white and just look at tonal values, shape, proportion, and also then fur texture, and also negative values. It's really I want to teach workshops with the white on black style, just 1-day workshops, and when I do one-to-ones with people, I do get them to create something in the white on black style, because it's not something they would normally probably choose to do, but it's so beneficial to them, and they can transfer then what they've learnt to their full colour work, because it is the same principle, the same foundation principle. You see here, I've just used that black polychromo just to come down and placing texture, directional lines, going back in with the white again now. Smoothing some of it out. In fact, watching this video, I'm quite excited. I actually want to go home and back to the other studio and start creating another piece, but I know I can't. I've got commission work to do, and then I need to write up this tutorial for you guys as well, and then a big workshop next weekend. So, okay, you can see there as I've zoomed out again how much it's starting to not only take shape, but that texture is starting to form as well. And it's really working. This combination of Pablos and then polychromos over the top really is working. Again, keep your eyes on that reference photo. Follow the directions. Check what lines up with what. So that cheekbone, take the direction from the corner of his mouth in a diagonal upwards to the right, and that should come out literally in the lower part of his ear. So just make sure all your direction lines line up. And also the corner of his mouth, if you go straight up, it just comes out just ahead of the front of his eye. Lots of things, you can just lay pencils down and create triangles and shapes and line one thing up with another. As long as you've got one item in the correct place, you can then, so I've got the eye obviously in the correct place, I can then work outwards and line everything else up with distance and direction and angles from that eye. I can do it by laying a pencil down or just by eye, using my own eye itself and judging. Again, you can see even with the polychromos, I'm limiting it to just 3 or 4 of the pencils, so a black, a white, 1 or 2 of the warm greys. And again, with the polar bear as well, there's lots of different fur texture areas. So you've got that bright fur smooth over the top of the head, but then when it comes down back over the top of the neck and down through there, it becomes quite fluffy textured fur. Underneath the jowl, under his neck itself, you've got quite coarse, long fur flicking outwards. Obviously you've got the texture of the stubbliness around his muzzle. So again, it's all different fur textures. You're not drawing the same texture all over. Same principles, slightly different use and technique with your hands with that pencil. How long you draw the actual fur fur line, when you flick it up, how long it is, how much pressure you use. It's just practice, and it's seeing and translating that through into your pencil. Again, you can't really do it this one where I say about going out and sort of just speaking to people that own, dogs and cats and things, and asking, can I handle your animal, just to feel the fur and the bone structure and the textures. Obviously you can't do that with a polar bear, but there are other animals that you probably can touch that have, stubbly fur, long textured fur, fluffy fur, all the different sorts. So here you can just see I'm just literally filling in bigger areas now with that initial base layer. I'm confident enough now that, okay, this is what's working. So I've gone in with the ash grey and the white. I've switched back to using the Pablos just to put this down again, this creamy base layer. And as I do it, you can just see that embossing that I initially did. It's marking the shapes and the initial direction lines. And now you can see the difference between the fur that we've worked. So even though that fur over the eye and cheek area is not worked to completion, you can now see how rough that texture is in comparison when you put that initial first layer down of pigment. So back in there with the polychromo over the top, just to create the finer fluffy lines up over that ear. And again, as you come down, especially in the front of the ear, you start to have chunks of fur. It's not like a flat layer of thick, fluffy fur. It's sort of chunks. It separates out into little clumps of fur. So we start drawing shapes and shading the shapes as we come down here, but we let some of the actual background as well, some of this texture that it's creating by laying down this initial layer. I actually embrace using that texture later on in the fur texture behind the ears especially. I just embrace it and actually use it as part of the texture of the actual fur of the animal. We don't want to take it all the way back to smooth in some places. We actually want to embrace, same as if you're working on suede mat or velour, it gives you a certain amount of texture anyway, so embrace the texture that it gives you and work with it and utilise it in your drawing. If it cuts out certain, if it's helping you create a texture, don't go over the whole lot with the pigment and try and recreate it just for the sake of putting pencil down. Utilise and embrace what the actual paper is giving you. Okay, so as I work, obviously I'm laying in the rough layers the ear, but as I spot things, I just go back over and just refine a little bit more as I see it. Then I'll come away and carry on working on the bigger areas. Then I'll go back in and refine those areas a little bit more. Because it's almost like I look at them with fresh eyes each time I look across. I'll work on a new area, then look across and go, ooh, that needs a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and I'll just go in and add it in there as I see it. So here, just marking in now, that shadow inside the ear just comes in under that top of the ear where it folds over, and then it's real dark shadow right on the internal ear canal, so just up from where my pencil is now, a nice dark line up through there. I'm just feeling my way around, just placing in all the little shadows. I'm not fixing any one area to a final conclusion with my first visit of the pencil. So I just feel my way around, place a little bit of pigment, a little bit of highlight, a little bit of dark, a bit of contrast, start to build it up and smooth it out, and then texturize it. So again, if you look at the inside of that ear, you've got long, lightish grey fluff coming over the top of that dark shadow. But then just where my grey pencil's going there now, you've got a hint of a dark shadow as that's going onto the outside of the ear again there. And again, don't rush, step away from your drawing, come back to it with fresh eyes. It really, really does help. Especially with this as well, with the pastel mat, you can sort of call it quits at any stage you like, even after just adding the water. If you're happy with it, you can leave it looking very watercolory. With this, as you can see, the texture of that paper, you do need to keep working it to a certain degree to get that smoothness, to then be able to create the fur texture over the top. So yeah, like I say, it will be interesting to use the other colours and see what results we can get with them. Just following the fur direction. I'm going to get a stopwatch as well. That's another thing I need to do. Just so I know I've got it all on camera, but because I need to like click on the button start when I start the ear of the stopwatch, so I can actually time how long I'm working on that ear or on an eye, just to time how long I work on that eye, because it all gets mixed up once I start editing the film and all the footage goes together. It's very difficult, and obviously, you know, some of it's time lapse. Some of it's speeded up once, 5 times, 10 times. It's very hard to judge how long I'm spending on a particular area. And also when I draw this, obviously you can't tell from the footage, but I get interrupted as well. The dogs will interrupt me, life interrupts me, the doorbell interrupts me, so I know I didn't sit and just draw this polar bear. It happened over the course of, I don't know, a week to 10 days. Just like a few minutes here, maybe a couple of hours somewhere else if I'm lucky. So each time you come back to it, you come back with fresh eyes, but you almost have to come back with a fresh start again, sort of remind yourself of what you were doing and where you were and what comes next. And it takes you a few minutes just to get back into the feel of using those pencils on this surface again, especially if it's a new surface. I must admit, by the end of this, I got to a certain point where everything clicked, and I was like, do you know what? I actually love this now. Plus the fact I think that what the piece was meaning to me, and the fact that I was working from my own reference photo for a polar bear, which I have took some photos of polar bears here in the UK. We've got 4 here now. There were 2 at the time when I first went up to the Yorkshire Wildlife Park, I just tried out a different method. See here, I'm just going in. This was just an experiment. I picked up the Derwent Chinese White and also the Caran D'Ache Luminance. So here I've just gone over the top with the Derwent Chinese White, just seeing if it gives me any brighter highlights. The Caran D'Ache Luminance didn't, but the Chinese White did. So it's optional, you don't need it. I'll pop it in as an optional pencil, but it did pluck out extra white brightness for me, as the Derwent Chinese White always does. Okay, so still working on this ear. So again, if you overlight in an area, you can just go back in, super sharp pencil, and place those little shadow lines back in again, and then you can go back in with a super sharp white pencil if you wanted and go work over the top, but only to a certain degree. It's not quite as flexible as that pastel mat. So just filling in that shadow going up on the inside of that ear again now. I'm still working just mainly on the contrast there. There is texture in there, but still working mainly on getting those contrasts, getting the depth of shadow and shape. Okay, so I've got that nice shadow going right up through the centre of that ear now. So I'm just starting to work. Remember I said about when we come away from the ear, these are clumps of fur down here now underneath this ear. So we need to start working slightly differently to, it's not like flicky long fur, it's more shapes. Just look at the texture. So here again, I'm just going in with that Pablo again, starting to mark in some of the fur direction, some of the shapes. But it's all different textures around here now. We've got that soft fluffiness over that neck that I'm putting in there now. And as we come down, it all starts to separate out into chunks of long fur, short fluffy fur, directional fur going in one way and then a different opposite direction. Especially as you go in a line down from the ear, down, straight down towards his jowls as well, underneath his neck. It all separates out in different directions. But again, think about that bone structure underneath as well. It's very, very important. So again, pressing quite hard now just to get that brightest white highlight in across the top there. It's back and forth with that white Pablo, just building, building. Again, you're seeing how much I'm working over each area. It is taking quite a bit of pencil. I'm probably using the most pressure I can put on the pencil here. Yeah, you can see my finger straining as I push the pigment down. So it does take, I say, it does take a lot of pigment. Okay, we'll be coming to the end of this first part of the polar bear video shortly, so I'll just let it play out, but I didn't want to try and squeeze everything down into just a single hour because we've got different textures to do here yet, and we also got the slice, the knife that goes in at the end I want to show you, and I don't want it to put it all through on a time lapse because I don't think you get to see enough. You just see, you know, so I'm just wanting to be able to see creating a different fur texture and just slightly different techniques I'm using. You see I work quite quickly in places as well. Some areas take a lot more refinement. You'll find that when I work behind the neck, coming down behind the ear, I'll be putting in quite rough textural shapes, and that's where I said I was going to embrace the actual properties of the paper itself, and you'll see that happen more as I come down around those real fluffy areas. So anyway, this is obviously just over an hour, your first video. I will edit the description later with the pencils that I've used, but again, it's the ArtSpectrum Colourfix Smooth paper in black. I've done mine approximately 12 by 16 inch. I used the Caran D'Ache Pablos pencils just in black, white, ash grey and grey, and the Faber Castell Polychromos I've used black, white and a couple of shades of the warm greys, so we're looking at a warm grey 3 and a 5. Possibly we'll use a Payne's grey later on as well, but I'll just double check and I'll make sure everything is in the materials list and the tutorial. Okay, so I'll just let this play out, and I'll say you'll just see me starting to create slightly different textures, and I'll join you for the second part, which will be